Since March of 2020, so much has changed. How we work, how we live, the tools we use, the way we collaborate. Hello and welcome to The Bridge. Join host Scott Kinka in a series of discussions of how some of the top leaders in technology bridged their businesses, technology, roadmaps, and lives into their new hybrid work reality. Our hope is that their insights and experiences will help you on your journey in business and in life, from who we were to who we are today. And maybe it'll help you get better prepared for whatever comes next. The Bridge is a service of Bridgepoint Technologies, one of the nation's leading IT advisory, procurement, and lifecycle management companies. Now, here's your host.
Hi, and welcome to The Bridge. I'm your host, Scott Kinka. My guest on this episode is Chris Sharp. He's the CTO of Digital Realty. It's not that often that I get to meet someone for the first time on the podcast, but here we were meeting on camera for the first time. Chris has spent 7.5 years at Digital Realty, Equinix before that, a couple tours of duty with traditional network carriers. We commiserated on that a bit. I had some of my own. But if you're not familiar with Digital Realty, they are one of the largest colocation operators in the world. And he had some really interesting perspective on approaching the pandemic from a global level. They got a jump on their U.S. plans because, frankly, they had already experienced some of the hotspots, Singapore in particular being one of their larger data centers that they had to contend with. So they sort of already, they made their mistakes there, sort of had their plans already in place for the U.S. A lot of it was about how to ensure you had talent in physical locations, that you didn't get stuck overseas while sending information workers home. A really interesting way of thinking about sort of the people aspects of that. He also talked about how they had to evolve pretty quickly. Need ramped in COLO quickly because, let's face it, the digital economy was driven by people in these large data centers during the pandemic. So, increased demand, increased install timeframes, all based on the pandemic. Even thinking about things like the fuel for backup generators not being guaranteed from a delivery perspective were all things they had to contend with. We did get into a discussion about what he thinks is not returning to normal and what they think is, and what's interesting. Chris shared his feelings about how the internet has fundamentally changed in terms of its traffic patterns. In particular, the flow of traffic from sort of centralized office hubs out to the cloud. Now it's sort of 1,000 points of light in the home out to various cloud vendors. All of a sudden, customers were seeing traffic change from a handful of giant nodes to 1 million users at home on various ISPs. And here I am thinking about them having real estate challenges when in reality, Digital Realty spent a lot of their effort in the pandemic just figuring out how to re-architect the network based on this new flow and based on the way that their customers were interacting with services and interacting in some ways with each other. Really forced them up the stack as a real estate company to think about application use of their customers. So, not just a power pipe and ping business in a lot of ways. I guess that's the digital part of Digital Realty. He shared some trends around what they're seeing with customers moving out, maybe not moving out, but moving some workloads from hyperscalers back into COLO and settling into hybrid architectures, taking more COLO as a result. I shared a blog from the CEO of Basecamp on my LinkedIn last week and I riled up some salespeople online, but it is a real conversation about which workloads belong where as we're beginning to optimize our workloads to our new reality. And, the move to hyperscale, while elasticity and capacity are immediate, not every workload fits very well in the sort of coin operated model of usage in hyperscale. So just a real conversation, one we're having very, very often at Bridgepoint with our customers. He also talked about capacity being the new currency at the digital age. If you think about it, the big hyperscalers are also consumers of COLO, right? So as they expand, they're competing with customers who are looking for their own data center space. Planning your digital footprint is essential if you are buying services really at a real estate level to support your business. Supply chain challenges are not going away. Availability of data center space in your desired geo is not assured. And it's one of the things that sort of planning ahead, working with organizations like Bridgepoint, he mentioned, are really important. In our fun, shameless prediction section, we talked about personal media algorithms, what we get served, who owns curation, maybe more transparency coming from those providers in the future about how they're delivering content to you. It was an interesting and kind of fun departure from the rest of the conversation, but it was really thought-provoking. At a high level, this was a different conversation. We've talked to cloud companies, service providers, Collab, VDI. We've talked to network and security execs. But here in this conversation, I got the opportunity to take a deep dive down into a real estate business in a lot of ways that found that it too is climbing up the digital transformation ladder to build and grow based on their customers' application use. So, here we are, a great chat with a self-professed technologist in a real estate business. This is my conversation with Chris Sharp, the CTO of Digital Realty. Welcome to the Bridge Podcast, where we speak to technology leaders and visionaries about how they've helped to bridge their business, technology roadmaps, and lives from who we were pre-pandemic to who we are today. I'm your host, Scott Kinka. Today, we're fortunate enough to have Chris Sharp with us. Chris is the CTO of Digital Realty. How are you, Chris?
Very good, Scott. Happy to be here today.
Fantastic. It's rare that I get the pleasure of doing a podcast where it's not somebody who I've met in the past. We haven't had the opportunity to meet before today. So I want to know a little bit more. Tell me about Chris. How long you've been there, where you came from, what motivates you. Just give me some background.
No, absolutely. Happy to do it. So again, Chris Sharp, Chief Technology Officer at Digital Realty. Been here 7.5 years. I work all the way from innovation ideation all the way through our products and our technical sellers. So broad scope here at Digital Realty. Before that, been doing data centers for quite some time. Was at Equinix for a while. Helped them focus on the cloud, the emergence of the cloud. But even before that, just spent a good bit of time at the different networks that have been built over the years and made that transition into the data center space quite some time ago. But just following that evolutionary path of technology throughout my career. And, one of the things that's unique and exciting to me about data centers is you get exposed to every major secular trend coming to market. And so just very happy to be here today and discuss any of that in any detail.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I guess at the end of the day, everything that's going on needs to live someplace. So you're touching everything, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's funny. We talk here at Digital Realty as one of the largest operators in the world today, and one of the very unique providers that has a fit for purpose product offering where we go from scale at multiple megawatts to cages to an individual rack, and that's all heavily interconnected. So very unique in the market.
Fantastic. So, I would love to start with just getting a little bit about your personal experience during the pandemic. And then we'll sort of branch over to a little bit more about, Digital Realty's stance and sort of how it's affected the business on a go-forward basis. But, I always like to get some anecdotes. Every single person who listens to this podcast was in the room where it happened, whenever that was, sometime in the middle of March. Take me back. I mean, you were there, right? You've been at Digital Realty now for 6+ years, I think you said. You were obviously there in March of 2020. What happened? Was there a big call? Did you all get together? Were you monitoring before that? How did it get started? How did you start thinking about what your response was going to be?
No, absolutely, Scott. And I mean, it's one of those things that, we were monitoring the situation around the globe for some time because we operate data centers all throughout all the globe and all the critical markets. We saw some of the early inklings of hotspots and some very concerning elements. Then once travel became more and more restricted, we had to make sure we had the right people in the right place and nobody was stranded out there. But definitely we're monitoring it for some time. But then there was just that precipice where the executive leadership team, we all got on a call and said, listen, we need to really start to think through how we're going to evolve the organization to ensure that we support the facilities that we have and then continue to support the customer demand, which I think it was an interesting element from my perspective is some of the very technically astute customers also saw the pandemic coming and were changing their architectures and quite frankly, the infrastructure they wanted to deploy rather quickly as well to meet that pending, kind of pandemic and the way that it played out.
Well, that's interesting. There was a lot in that question. So let me unpack that. I'm going to go back to the first one, which was you had employees all over the world. Just give me quickly on Digital Realty.
What's the footprint?
Yeah, we have roughly 300 plus data centers all throughout the globe. There's not a major market that we don't operate in. I think one of the unique aspects that we do is
Okay.
we do a master plan where we build out, a complete, campus design that has heavily interconnected, kind of a colo focused center. And then all of that is supported by a massive scale facilities out around that. One of the largest markets we operate today is Loudoun, right there in Washington, D.C., a little bit south of D.C., but critical market for us. But that's really the product that we brought to market that has a big balance, because in those products, you're going to have massive hyperscalers that also operate in a very global basis, but then you also have these enterprise customers that are locked to a single market. So striking that balance with our resources and ensuring that the facilities are going to be maintained, that we have access to fuel, that they're being taken care of, and making sure that everybody's being safe. That was our ultimate goal in communicating to our customers, where we really blocked and started to limit some of the access to the data centers. And so that was in the right the right mind of trying to protect the actual employees within the facility. And so we were able to support that rather quickly, and it just evolved it over time.
So tell me, where were obviously if you're operating in all the major centers, that means you were already on the ground in some of the hot spots. Where were the first places you were concerned about when all that was going on?
Yeah, I would say, one of the markets that we were concerned about early on was Singapore. It was a critical market for us. And also, I think one of the lockdowns that really impacted our ability was Europe, and no longer flights coming from Europe, and just the overall international flights, because a majority of our customers are multinational today. So they're not in one market, in one facility. They leverage the full platform effect, if you will, which we call platform digital. So we saw, it evolving rather quickly. And I can't emphasize this enough. No two markets were alike, right? Not only in, hotspots, but then just the rules, the regulations. And so that was some of the uniqueness that we have with the deep heritage of people in the facilities that are from that market, most likely. And they really started to help us understand what exactly we would need to do to maintain the data center, which is deemed critical infrastructure by most.
Got it. Did you end up kind of having to play, like employee roulette here a little bit, where you were like, I got to get people out of specific locations, and then before they get locked out, and also then make sure that we have enough to, that's an interesting kind of thing to think about. We haven't heard a lot about that, but I guess you've got to balance safety and staffing at the same time. Was that a critical part of the conversation?
Oh, 100%. It was safety first. And that's where we really wanted to protect the local teams that are going into the facility every day to ensure that the infrastructure performs accordingly. And so that's where we started to limit and even block. And the ultimate goal, or the ultimate end state, was we were blocking a lot of inbound customer tours. We started to do it virtually rather quickly through different kinds of webcams and streaming that kind of virtual tours, if you will. But the employees were most likely in that region already. But then we really started to try to figure out how do we protect them and insulate them from the, broader, people coming in and out and traversing the facility.
Got you. Okay. No, that makes sense. Wow. It's a lot to contend with as you're trying to figure out what that was. Yeah. So obviously you have people that work in the facilities, your corporate offices, as an example, here in the US. Let's get back to what is probably a little bit less of a data center company stance, and maybe feels a little bit more like a traditional organization that was contending with this. Your more corporate office locations here in the United States. How did you ratchet down? Were you just on this date, everybody's going home?
Correct. And again, there was a little bit of a slow boil, but then we started to just mandate some rules saying, listen, it's a work from home environment. And, Scott, you point to a great piece where, because our business is a little bit unique, where we have these operations and these operations teams that go to the facility day to day, that was treated very differently than our traditional corporate employees. So it was much easier to really, mandate a ruling where it was a work from home policy. We had some IT kind of hurdles that we overcame rather quickly with laptop distribution, making sure people had the right equipment so that they could, work from home effectively. And so, it was a little bit of a dual system, kind of dual rule scenario. But again, one of the things that was great is, the team and the culture of the team, and being able to kind of quickly go to that virtual environment, both corporate and the ops teams, was phenomenal. And I think, dealing with some of our customers, I was able to see some of that as well. There's a few stories of individuals having a very hard time going to that virtual distributed environment, but quite frankly, it expedited a lot of our business as well. It was just another secular trend.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, I mean, I read, and everybody's got different ways of quantifying this, but 5 years of progression in 5 months type of thing in terms of technology adoption, something along those lines. You mentioned two things in there. One was around collaboration from a systems perspective. What do you guys use? Were you already in process pretty well adopted, or did you have to scramble into it during the pandemic? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, great question, Scott. I'll be honest with you, we were lucky because we've done so much M&A. So we were acquiring a lot of companies, which forces you to be really collaborative and already leaning into a lot of the tools. One of the tools that I think is, extremely important to us is O365, Microsoft Teams. Okay. So that's one we really leaned in on. I think it's interesting to highlight for your audience, which I think might be interesting to a few, where there was kind of two phases of how the collaboration and how the overall industry evolved, right? Phase one was, oh my gosh, these traffic patterns have changed, right? Like overnight, you used to have, centralized headquarter, massive amounts of traffic, private WANs, capacity was built there. Then whoop, it's all in the metro, and there's, single points of failure. Some certain networks were having brownout situations where, being able to procure cross connects rather quickly really helped a lot of our customers, right? And that's where a lot of the inbound tickets that we were able to rapidly respond to, so that, they understood traffic was originating here, now it's distributed. So watching those traffic patterns and being able to respond to that rather quickly. And then I think the second one is just the proliferation of some of these new systems and new, video collaboration platforms like WebEx, BlueJeans, Teams. Just the massive utilization of those has shot up, which then required more and more, quite frankly, in the most simplistic sense, infrastructure inside of the facilities such as ours. So not only that second piece of deploying more compute connectivity, but there was kind of two phases that we were able to respond to. And even somewhat post-pandemic, if you will, with the new state that we're in, again, there's just a tremendous amount of demand for these types of cloud applications and collaborative applications out there.
We're like, it's a world where we're intrinsically more cloud native. I mean, we found during the pandemic, folks like us, we sold an awful lot of bandwidth in March, April, and May of 2020. And most of the time it was just to get people from their homes back to the corporate data center, to hit the security edge, to get back out to the cloud, right? And that's kind of what you were talking about in that inversion of where the central part of the network is. Do you think that this was the moment when did we finally cross over from kind of corporate WAN, corporate data center centricity to traffic to, kind of cloud centric, if you will, or at least maybe centric to the business's data center as off premise?
Yeah, 100%, Scott. And I think it's interesting, right? Where, people really started to understand the limitations of the internet, right? Private connectivity picked up because they wanted that, not only the security of it, but they wanted the quality of service, right? And I think, having done so many webinars and media interviews, you really want to make sure that, your connectivity is there and that you'll have a good end user experience. But that transition happened, rather quickly, and it continues to where customers were looking at maybe one or two primary and a secondary disaster recovery location to your point, like more of a cloud model where can I have 5, 6, 7 locations around the globe and then really have a deterministic, based approach where if one goes down, then this is your secondary, but leveraging all of that infrastructure in a hot scenario is the future, because I think it provides you the best return on investment. And, one of the most desired end states for our customers is hybrid multi-cloud, right? Where they're going to be utilizing multiple different cloud applications, but they also want to have that private infrastructure, and that private infrastructure is deployed in multiple locations.
Yeah, now that's interesting. So, it's funny, we talk a lot about, and obviously we do a lot of business together. Our consultants, engage Digital Realty often. We're seeing demand increase for a host of reasons right now. I mean, obviously, one I would perceive to be, the idea that the corporate data center the corporate office is perhaps less populous and businesses are trying to unwind those investments, and data centers kind of come along with it, right? I mean, that would certainly be one. The other one, though, that we found was perhaps over reliance. Maybe reliance is the bad term, but sort of this mad push to the cloud without application refactoring, without optimizing applications for a usage model. And we're seeing a pretty interesting reflect back now where businesses have gone kind of cold turkey all the way out to the cloud. And now they're moving backwards into more of a hybrid scenario because they realize the workloads that we're going to, if you'll pardon the expression, lump them up right on the usage-based kind of cloud usage. Is that something that you guys are seeing right now?
Oh, 100%. And I think it's interesting, right? You just to unpack it a little bit with what you just said, the data center at the base of your headquarters is definitely waning, right? Because the connectivity is not there, the broader ecosystem of partners that you can interconnect with and leverage those services in a more efficient fashion. If any of our collective teams run into that, that's a gold mine, right? Like, you start to talk to the end user, the customer, the CIO, the CTO, because quite frankly, there's a lot of challenges that they're probably trying to overcome. And we did see customers go, okay, I'm not going to do it here in my headquarters basement, but I'm going to go all in on the cloud. And then that's when the CFO comes calling, right? Because it gets rather expensive, and you got to right size the workload and understand steady state. It probably should be in a private environment. And so, the partners that we've seen and we work with bring a lot of that back out of that cloud, and striking that balance and the elasticity between the two. That's the desired end state that we see a lot of our collective customers looking for.
Completely. I mean, it's just really interesting. These are the digital transformation conversations that we're constantly in today, whether it's one direction or the other, whether it's from a network centricity perspective or where the data center is. Even, I mean, you mentioned earlier, you were talking about, your endpoints. Like, you guys are a colo company, and here you are struggling perhaps. I'll have a follow-on question, but struggling perhaps with just sort of getting a hold of laptops and figuring that whole strategy. And I'm having conversations with customers where I'm saying, hey, listen, why are you issuing operating systems? You're finding sometimes that corporate data center exists for the one app left in the business, right? That's not in the cloud, whatever. And it's always the biggest and most important one. Don't get me wrong. It's the ERP, it's the scheduling system, it's the medical systems, whatever. Yeah. But it's like, here you have this, you're issuing endpoints because there's a client server app, and it's just one application at the end of the day, right? So, I mean, does that enter into the digital realty conversation? I mean, are you guys having kind of the app modernization discussions, or are you, as the name would imply, really there primarily to support from a real estate perspective? Like, take us up the value stack in the digital realty conversation.
Oh, love to. And I just want to emphasize one piece. There is always a sacred piece of infrastructure. Hopefully they know what application is tied to it, but it's usually heavily protected. And, one of the things I'm often, jaw dropped with, just because of how long I've been in the industry, where a lot of mainframes are coming back into style. And quite frankly, we see a lot of mainframes coming into the environment. And to your point, and to your direct question, that's where we start, right? Where not only is it just about space and power, but we start at, what are your applications? What are the workflows? What are the partners you're betting your business on? And having that conversation, which then translates into an actual architectural design. Right. And so asking people, how many clouds are you betting your business on? And they start to list them off. And I'm like, well, how are you accessing them? How are you consuming them? And like 90% of them are just over the internet. I'm like, how would you like to privately tie all of these elements together with cross connects? Or we have products such as our service fabric, where you can start to tie to every availability zone around the globe from one location. They're like, didn't know that was possible. Mm-hmm. Right. And so the art of, what are your applications? How are you consuming them? And then translate it into, what are the space and power requirements in each of the regions that you're really trying to be effective in? Because, one of the things we also have seen, pick up rather quickly is, if it works in one market, there's a revenue opportunity in another, right? So a lot of our customers land and continually expand, and that's what we're always trying to support them. And so it's a balance of, what are your apps? And then what is and I get a lot of people give me a hard time as a technologist at a real estate company, but if you don't have that master planning on the real estate side, you could end up in a really bad time because, the biggest thing I would tell all of the listeners today is start the conversation early. If it's digital transformation, or we produced a report called Data Gravity, but start to think about the physical assets required to making you successful. And you better start having that conversation much, much sooner than anybody ever thinks they should. Because there's more times than not, I'll get into a scenario where a piece of hardware, or there's not enough capacity in a certain market, or the network connectivity is not there. And so having the conversations around, what is it that your business is trying to achieve? And if that's based around applications, or if it's based on data, but start that dialogue early and get educated on what is the state of possible, and then what is state of the art, right? Because I think a lot of people are like, hey, let's get a couple of racks at the COLO. And I'm like, okay, that's backwards, right? Like,
right.
Some customers come to us with RFP. They come with an RFP of like, I would like 4 racks. I'm like, okay, can we talk about what you're trying to do with it? And then sometimes it's like, hey, I don't want 4 racks. I want 3 racks in, 4 or 5 different markets, because they start to understand the true benefit they can get.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I do, we are absolutely enamored with speeds and feeds in our business, and oftentimes forget about what the business outcomes are. Do you find that the role, I mean, you're a CTO, and obviously you're in a tech company, but you deal with CIOs and CTOs as your customer, I would imagine, every day. Do you feel like that role's changed slightly, kind of coming out of the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I think the pandemic woke people up to the fact that technology can be very beneficial, right? And then there are some people that went all in and then got kind of burned on a security breach, or, it got expensive. But, technology is an underpinning of your success, right? And like, that's why, I've been doing data centers longer than I care to even admit, but the technology that comes within it, and the applications, and quite frankly, the economy that has been built because of the data center is phenomenal, right? But we are seeing the role of the CTO change, where it's, the CIO role is kind of being bound into a similar kind of position, where that data, the infrastructure, the systems, and how that's going to run, and then where are you headed with it, right? Because one thing we haven't talked about today, and it's everywhere, is artificial intelligence, right? And I hear so many people just throw the term around, but they don't think through, what is it really going to achieve as a business? Like, what is the critical decision that you're going to get out of your neural network or your machine learning? And then how are you going to make that change in your business to utilize that data point quicker? And I think there's a lot of infrastructure and physical connectivity that you need to think through before you can get into a place to get the benefit of artificial intelligence. But not a company out there that doesn't think about it. Certain levels of maturity vary across companies, but because AI and the way it's coming to market, it's also changed those roles. And, like, even the CFO is starting to look at, wow, maybe I need to be doing more data analytics on how my financial systems are running, so I can be quicker to respond on any kind of inflationary events, or, just the overall financial climate that we all deal in today. They want to be at the forefront of being able to have the most amount of data to make an educated decision rather quickly.
I mean, in a lot of ways, I think, AI is one of those things that will force us into having grown-up business outcome discussions when we're looking at technology, right? I mean, I walk into meetings sometimes and we want AI. I don't even know what that question means, right? So you got to kind of take a step back, always, and elevate the conversation up to, the business outcome. But I do find, I mean, honestly, that to me is really where I feel like the primary role of the CIO or CTO in the business has changed. And sort of, I think I like what you said, we woke up to the fact that it's a strategic role in the business, not just an expense category that sits in the finance organization or in the operations organization, right? It's got access to, power data, improve outcomes, improve customer experience, improve employee experience, and, generate retention, all of those things. I'm finding the conversations changing every day. It's one of the things that's been so interesting for me, here on the bridge, on the pod, getting to talk to business leaders like yourself about how it's affected their business as well. This has been a super interesting conversation. Chris, I could go all afternoon on this, but I'll jump to the end. Awesome. And ask you a couple fun questions. But before I do that, let's just take one step back. Advice for tech leaders. I think you shared a little bit of it earlier when you were talking about sort of beginning with the end in mind. I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but right now with what's going on, what's the advice 100%. You can give to tech leaders and businesses?
Start to have conversations early around, what type of physical infrastructure or hardware you're going to need. The supply chains are constrained. I don't see them getting better anytime soon, but get ahead of it, right? Like start having conversations with multiple providers out in the market just to get educated on what can be achieved. But be mindful, and for our mutual sellers and BD individuals that align with our customers, ask about AI. It opens up the dialogue, right? And you'll realize quickly what the customer knows, what they don't know, and you can slot yourself right in the middle on showing them a solution that'll set them up for success.
100%. Well, that's a great way to end the semi-technical portion of this. I have 3 questions for you. We'll start with a shameless prediction, and then we'll have some fun questions. So here's the first one. It doesn't matter whether it's in business, tech, or life. Give me a shameless prediction for the next 18 to 24 months.
Shameless prediction. I think you're going to start to see a big shift in the way we consume media, and it's going to be algorithm based. I think you start to see some early inklings with a lot of applications out there and the change of, Meta and some of these things. And I think it's pretty interesting in early days, but you're going to see a big pickup in algorithms for ourselves personally and then algorithms for ourselves professionally.
So here's the question. Who runs and owns the algorithm?
That's
that's the trick, right?
A very, very critical question. Depending upon the app, depending upon the placement, but I think curated media is going to be something that's going to be pretty prominent for all of us.
Do you think that somebody's got the nerve to enable the end user to be involved in defining their own curation in that way? Or do they lose the advertising value when that happens?
Well, I think advertising has shifted as well, right? Where it was heavily targeted, but the changes and how we track data on individual users, it's now more of a percentage basis. But I do feel that the algorithm for certain above board applications will be more transparent, and they will show you what they're doing. And quite frankly, you could tune it, right? They call it bubble bursting, right? Where if you find yourself within a certain bubble and only getting certain type of media, you could go in and say, listen, I don't want to do this anymore. But I do think some will be, but there's always going to be some nefarious activities where, those algorithms are going to be for a singular purpose and be very private in what they're actually tracking. And
that of course assumes on the comment that you made earlier that you want your bubble burst, right? Some people are very happy in there. We could be talking about that one for the next 30 minutes. So I think we'll jump on to the next question. Your absolute must-have app. So the next pandemic happens, this is a I Am Legend level pandemic, and you get one app on your phone to operate off of for the rest of your life. What's that going to be?
That is hard. Well, I love the traditional internet because it's the long tail of if you have the time and the energy, you can get educated on anything, but be careful of your source of data. But I'll tell you, some of the video I get out of TikTok that's highly curated, very short and quick for like finance, for different types of, it's amazing, right? But again, beware of the algorithm behind it, but some of the data you can get out of that and the quick nature, real-time nature of it as well has been pretty phenomenal.
I sense a TikTok video coming out of that last answer that our producer is over here nodding in the background going, he might get that going. All right, here's the last question. This is a funny one. There's a reason why I'm asking it. You have a choice. You get to play essentially second fiddle in one of the 3 situations. You get to be either the bass player in your favorite band, the supporting actor in your favorite movie, or like the third down gadget back kind of comes out 4 or 5 times a game for the big play on your favorite football team. Which one would it be and why?
I picked the acting.
Okay.
I just think, there's some of my favorite movies out there. I think it would be fun to do that.
Do you have one in mind where that's the role you want? That's the supporting role you would die to play?
Yeah, like Doc in Back to the Future. Right? Love it. Marty McFly, that whole scenario, the whole genre.
I love it. I mean, from this conversation, I could clearly see you playing Doc. So that was a great answer. I love it. And by the way, you answered that question quicker than I think anybody who's been on the show yet. Like, you just laid it straight down. So I appreciate that. Before we let you go, any last words for the listeners of the pod? Anything else you'd like to share?
No, I appreciate it. Always welcome the feedback. Yep. You can hit me up on LinkedIn and everything else, but it's exciting time. So just stay safe, be safe.
Yeah, fantastic. How can people find you if they want to get a hold of you?
If you hit me up on LinkedIn, or you can hit me up at Digital Realty as well, my website, or the digitalrealty.com website. My email address is
fantastic. Up there. Well, I appreciate that. Thanks for joining us, Chris. I really appreciate it. And thank all of you for joining us on The Bridge. I am Scott Kinka. If you've enjoyed the show today, don't forget to like us on your favorite podcast platform. And we'll see you soon.
Listen, if you made it this far, there must have been some good content, or you're just a fan or a relative of mine. In either case, we appreciate you spending your most valuable asset with us, your time. We don't take that lightly. We'd also like to say one more time that we are appreciative of Bridgepoint Technologies and their belief and sponsorship of the show. We hope that if you or someone you know is thinking about your company's digital transformation, or simply the next IT project that you may not have the resources, budget, or time to get to, I'm sure that Bridgepoint, one of the country's fastest growing technology advisory and procurement firms, can help. Check out Bridgepoint at bridgepointtechnologies.com. Don't forget the E on Bridgepoint, or simply reach out to me at Skinka, SKINKA, at bpt3.net. Also, take a minute, please, if you would, to give us a 5-star review on your favorite platform. It helps give us the visibility to reach other people like you. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Bridge. I am Scott Kinka. And until next time, there's a lot of noise out there. In business and in life, do what you can to be the signal. Thanks.